Okay, so I wanted to start off just a show of hands. Who here, and you on Zoom, who here is enlightened?
I've met it once.
Sweet, sweet. Yeah, it's kind of a ridiculous question, right? Um, and it makes me think like, what would Seisin do if she were here, or what would Dogen do if he was here, or what would the Buddha do if he was here, right? Would the Buddha not raise his hand? Um, I've just been thinking about enlightenment a lot recently, particularly because it's something that I've avoided. I don't know if anyone's picked up on that over time, but I've really been kind of terrified of the word and the concept and talking about it. It is the great untalkaboutable. And so I really try and have kind of caught myself really just trying to avoid the word at all costs, not talking about enlightenment. And so that's coming up, and it's coming up in my practice. It's coming up with my work and study with Seisin as well. Um, and, there's all these different ways that we talk about, enlightened activity and oneness and no self and the precepts and compassion and wisdom. There's all these kind of words that, try to highlight various aspects of this basic thing of enlightenment. And so I'm kind of facing my fears today, and I just want to really look at what is this? Because in the end, this is a Buddhist temple. Um, and all Buddhism, whether Zen or Vipassana or Tibetan or Tantra or any of them, Theravadan, it's all here because we're curious about this dude's enlightenment, right? This guy 2,500 years ago sat real hard in the forest, saw a star in the sky, and had enlightenment. And that's why we're all here. And so, what is that? What is that enlightenment? I'm really, like I said, just for myself, I'm really digging into that because I've just been avoiding it for so long. Um, is it like flipping a switch? Is that what happened? Did the Buddha, because the Buddha is just a guy. He was just a guy, right? We're very clear about that. This is not a extraterrestrial. This is not a supernatural being. This is a guy who died from eating spoiled meat. Just about as guy as you can get, human as you can get. So what happened? Is it like flipping a light switch, right? He saw the star and something happened and he went from non-enlightened to enlightened. Does that make any sense? And what is that experience like? What does that do to us? Um, are there qualities of a person before and after enlightenment? Do they become more blah or less blah or more able to do blah? We have our ideas that we project, right? Maybe an enlightened person is soft spoken, an enlightened person is patient, an enlightened person doesn't get angry, an enlightened person, I hear people say, oh, that teacher, they had a light shining from their eyes, or they seem to float when they walk on the ground. Um, and I just don't think it takes very much work to have all of those preconceived notions we have about enlightenment to be proven false. Um, you know, what about the Zen master who decided to collude with the Nazis in World War II and like offer monks in the war effort? Is that enlightened? What about the Zen teacher I went to work with, who I actually ended up really clicking with, and I have nothing but the most respect for this teacher and really enjoyed practicing with them. But the first time I met them, they like barked orders at me to go do a task. I didn't do it correctly, and they just yelled their head off at and just chewed me out and made me feel so awful. Is that enlightened activity? Is that an enlightened person? Um, any quality that you can assign to someone, if they're enlightened, they'll be like this. They'll talk like this. They'll smell like this. They'll act like that. Any quality is already dualistic. Even the practice, even the manifestation of enlightenment, right? The Buddha had his enlightenment, and his thing was like, okay, if you really want this, if you really want to live an enlightened life, then you have to do your take your home leave. That's the language that's used. Taking the home leave, something like that. Basically, you have to, you know, get rid of all your stuff, leave your house, leave your family, and leave society. Just beg for your food, wear a robe, and that is how you live an awakened life. And then cut to Bernie Glassman, who is our founder and head teacher's teacher. And he ended up in his more mature years of practice, he ended up saying, screw the priesthood, screw the monastery, even kind of screw Zazen. And his entire enlightened manifestation was social action, being married, having a family, going out into the world, like being so invested and engaged in society. The exact opposite. Well, maybe not the exact opposite, but something very different from the kind of life the Buddha was prescribing. So, what this enlightenment looks like, what it feels like, how it manifests, we can't put our finger on it. There's no thing. And yet, we have this Buddha mind seal that is passed down from teacher to student, right? We have this kind of honoring of the lineage um, that really theoretically and practically is very heavily guarded and delicately treated as passing on the mind of the Buddha, right? So the Buddha had his enlightenment, and then he says to his student Kashyapa, you also had that enlightenment. I can see. You see what I see. You understand what I understand. Now you go get students and you pass it to them. And so on and so on and so on. To the present day, where literally Seisen, Echo Sensei, these other transmitted teachers that we have, they literally have been empowered, certified, acknowledged, however you want to say it, as carrying the mind of the Buddha, having that same understanding as the Buddha. So, what could that possibly be? And is it just a thing that happens, like a light switch? And what does that do? Does it change you? Again, I have no answers for you here. These are all just things for us to look at, and we'll kind of get back to that later. So, yeah, I'm just really looking at this and trying to not shy away from, this difficult concept to talk about, right? The untalkaboutable. But one good way to look at it, there's different, ways that Buddhism talks about enlightenment, but there's one kind of major study of enlightenment that says that there's kind of two aspects, right? There's the intrinsic and there's the experiential. Intrinsic, experiential. And that's what kind of makes it so difficult, right? And if we want to see the spirit of this, um, just look at the Buddha, right? So the Buddha has this experience, this seeing the star, and boom, he's enlightened. And then what does he say? He says, all beings are the wisdom and Tathagata, the wisdom and compassion of the Tathagata. The Tathagata being Buddha, awakenedness, right? So he has this thing that happens, but then he also says, hey, all of us intrinsically are this the whole time. Just my life as it is awakened, but I didn't see it. Right? So this is just kind of a clear way to think about enlightenment. Intrinsically, yes, all of us, as we are, whether we know it or not, are manifesting Buddha, manifesting emptiness, manifesting no self, manifesting the identity of relative and absolute. All these different ways we can talk about it. Um, Another famous koan that we talk about a lot here, and Sason talked about it recently. Sorry, I'm just getting my book here. Um, so Nangaku is an old teacher, and he comes up on Baso, and Baso is in his hut doing meditation. And Nangaku says, Baso, what are you up to? And Baso says, I'm in seated meditation. And Nangaku says, why are you in seated meditation? And Baso says, I'm trying to make a Buddha. And then Nangaku goes over and he grabs a tile, right? Like a tile. And he starts polishing the tile. And Baso says, what are you doing? Nangaku says, I'm polishing this tile. Why are you polishing this tile? And Nangaku says, to make a mirror, right? And so the kind of most popular, most common, kind of easy way to see this is that, and there's different interpretations, and Sason talks about it in a different way, which we'll get to later. But it's as silly to think that you can become this thing called Buddha that's like different from how you are now. It's as silly to say that as it is for me to say I'm going to turn this tile into a mirror. Because as you are is a mirror. You are nothing but a reflection of the entire universe. You are the entire universe. And so to think that you can like do some kind of thing to make yourself into this other thing called, it's all dualism. Um, so that's kind of one example. And again, there's a lot of ways of seeing that koan. Um, but that's a way to kind of see this intrinsic element that we are intrinsically enlightened. So congratulations, you can go home, right? So this is the transmission of the light or transmitting the light. It's also known as the Shoyo Roku. No, Denko Roku. The Denko Roku. This is a book of koans that basically tells the story of the first 52 ancestors' enlightenment. Right. So in that lineage, starting from the Buddha, it starts with the Buddha's enlightenment. He wakes up and sees the morning star, and he has enlightenment. And then it talks about his students' enlightenment, and then it talks about his students' enlightenment, and his student. So for those of us who are interested in looking at what is this enlightenment experience, here's a book that's like, here's how it went down for all these people. And it's just fascinating. It's really, I mean, fascinating to read and think about, but also a very powerful practice. And so for the intrinsic, let's see. There was one I flagged. Yeah. So the 40th ancestor was Zen master Tongan Dao Pi, Chinese guy. His teacher said, if you want to acquire such a thing, you must become such a person. Since you are such a person, why be anxious about such a thing? Hearing this, the master was awakened. Right? So this is kind of presenting this intrinsic and experiential in one, right? So the teacher literally just kind of says, yeah, you have to become a Buddha, and you already are. So why be anxious about it? And for some reason, at that moment, that really struck Tongan Daopi, and he had this experience of no need for experience. That's the best way I can put it. So that's kind of taking a look at the intrinsic enlightenment that we are, but we just don't see it. And therefore, we also have to put emphasis on this experience, the experiential enlightenment. And that's why we sit on the ground for so long. And that's why we work with teachers who are hard on us and make us feel bad sometimes. And that's why we do koans and are wrong all the time and have to be wrong and do this difficult work and toil because this experience is not easy. And, I personally believe, and this is, I guess, based on very little evidence, and many, many teachers might completely disagree with me, but I would be very surprised if there's anyone in this room, anyone on this block, anyone at all who has not had an enlightenment experience. Um, Experientially, right? Since we are it intrinsically, all it takes is just a really quick moment of settling down this small self to just catch a glimpse of that intrinsic Buddha that we are. So, the idea that there's some really special experience where, only this a select few get the experience of this magic unicorns flying in the sky and light beams coming. Like I just don't think that's it. I really think we all, especially those of us who spend any time in Zazen, um, having that glimpse of what we are, which is completely one with everything. I just think that we all know what that is, and that's why we're here. And our practice is to continue to deepen that experience and to cultivate that experience and to continue to invite that experience. Because without it, without developing that experiential enlightenment, um, we just are asleep. We're just asleep. And even the Buddha, the magical Buddha, right? What did he do when he got enlightened? He committed his life to practicing more and sitting more. So the idea that there's some kind of light switch and I used to not be enlightened and now I'm enlightened and it's over. I think we can dispel that myth and get rid of that expectation in our practice and realize that this experience is something that we continue to cultivate. So, anyway, the more I talk about it, the grosser I feel. So I just want to share because it's just I just get such a kick out of this book and like these were actual people and this is the story as it's been told from hundreds and hundreds of years ago of their enlightenment experience. And so I just wanted to share some. We don't have to talk about them, just hopefully they kind of inspire you and maybe trigger some kind of resonance in you. So this is Parshva, going back in time. We're back in India now. So the 10th patriarch was the Venerable Parshva. He attended the Venerable Buddha Mitra, his teacher, for 3 years without ever sleeping. One day, his teacher, Buddha Mitra, was reciting a sutra and expounded on the birthless nature of all things. Hearing this, the master was awakened. So, you know, this experience, I think, we talk about being on the cushion and having experiences, right? There's a word samadhi, there's another word kensho, but I think mostly samadhi we talk about as during zazen, right? Really, really deep, powerful, quiet, silent, unmoved meditation. We can have that experience of totally dropping off and becoming one with everything. But it happens in so many ways, right? Here's this guy Parshva, and we say it's beyond words, it's beyond concepts, it's not in the books, it's not in the words. And here's this guy who had his enlightenment experience hearing words. And I think they talk about, not in this book, but they talk about the sixth ancestor, Hui Neng, that he was initially enlightened upon hearing the Diamond Sutra. So, I don't think it's unnotable that, they make a point of saying that for 3 years, practicing without sleeping, right? Just to, and, who knows if that's true, but just to kind of highlight the intensity of that practice. And with that intensity, we kind of open ourselves up so that we can see the morning star, or we can hear a sutra, or hear the leaf fall from the bamboo tree, and just have that moment, that experiential moment of, I am nothing but this. So, yeah, for him, it was hearing a sutra. That one's too long. We already did that, so I'll just read a couple more. The 41st patriarch was the great master Tongan Guanzhi. He studied with the other guy we talked about, Tongan Daopi. Um, so the student, Tongan Guanzhi, says, the ancients said, what worldly people love, I love not. I wonder what you love, master. And then the master says, I have already been able to be like this. With these words, the master was greatly awakened. So again, this is in a dialogue. Um, sure, yeah. So Tongan Wanzhi studies with Tongan Daopi. The master says, no, the student, Tongan Wanzhi, says, the ancients said, right? So he's one on one with his teacher. And he says to his teacher, the ancients said, ancients usually in this book mean, the ancient sages, the wise people, the Buddhas of yesteryear. They said, what worldly people love, I love not. That's the quote from the ancients. And then the student asks the master, I wonder what you love. And then the master says, I have already been able to be like this. And with these words, the master was greatly awakened. Right? So we can all resonate with that, right? The student comes in and he says, all these books I'm reading, all this, wisdom I've been hearing from the past, like, you know, they they didn't they made a point of saying that they didn't love worldly things, and they, gave up their homes, and they gave up romance, and they gave up kids, and they gave up things and food and clothes and all that stuff. And so what about you, master? Like, are you as selfless? You know what I mean? Like, how humble are you? What is it that you love? And of course, we can already see that this student is like super wrapped up in an idea, right? What enlightenment should look like. An enlightened person can't have a house. An enlightened person can't drive a car. An enlightened person can't have a wife. Um, and that's ridiculous. It's dualism. And so the teacher says, I have already been able to be like this. And so the trap here is to think that the master is saying, yeah, I'm like that too. I don't need worldly things. Oh yeah, I've been like that a long time. I gave up my house and I've been in it and I got my robes and I'm cool. I'm good. You can trust me. But I don't think that's what the point of this koan is, right? I think the point is to really look at this. I have already maybe pointing to that intrinsic enlightenment. All of us already are just this. Forget about your notions of what it needs to look like, of how you need to be, how you need to sound. Gosh, I went to this one Dharma talk by this guy who like wasn't even a teacher, and he was just kind of obnoxious, but he was like giving this talk about how he recently met this monk, and the monk claimed to like have no feelings, and he never smiled, and he never cried, and he never laughed because he was always just and that's real enlightenment. And I just had to leave, like I just could not be there anymore. And he's got this big famous popular place, so it was really sad to hear that. um because you know, God help me, even our least favorite ex-president and our least favorite billionaire people are Buddha, and they are completely able to wake up to their true self. So to say it doesn't involve worldly thing, it's all an idea. To really just be this: worldly, not worldly, things, not things, peaceful, not peaceful. It's all ideas. And obviously, the way he said it really triggered that experiential, like, yes, that shift in the student. So, you know, good luck. I really want this experience for myself, and I really want this experience for all of you. And I really want Sweetwater Zen Center to be a place for people to cultivate this experience. Um, and, the pursuit or the practice of that experience really does lie in the trust and almost faith that you are already it. And even though we're cultivating and trying for something, it's the ultimate trying to not try. And we've talked about that before. Um, and, I don't know why I want to share this, but as I was preparing, I just thought it was maybe worth sharing. I don't know how it ties in or what it really means to say, but just from my own experience, I've been working with the same teacher, Sason, for 17 years, and she has never, ever asked me about any experience I've ever had, on the cushion or off. And anytime I offer it, right? Because sometimes we go into Doksan or interview and we had this incredible awakening experience or this incredible moment of whatever, and we want to share it. And anytime I've gone in and shared some kind of major, life shattering, oh, the whole world just was me, all that stuff, and I'll share it with her and she'll just, great, and I'll let it go. So I don't know what that does for you. um, I think it mostly points to um, the koan I talked about earlier, where Baso is trying to make a Buddha and Nangaku is trying to make a mirror out of a tile. Dogen's interpretation of this koan is that the sitting itself, that the polishing itself is Buddha, and that to separate practice from realization is a myth or a delusion. I practice in order to get blah. I sit in order to become blank. That's the trap. That's the delusion. And just sitting, just making that effort um, is enlightenment, is enlightened activity, is Buddha. And so, yeah, I think, as I look at enlightenment, um, I'm starting to think of it as, as a relationship, as a practice, right? There's no one that I can think of who has had an enlightenment experience or is considered enlightened or whatever you want to say, who does not sit all the time. And so I really think that this true, authentic enlightenment experience is a call to go deeper. It's not a soothing satisfaction. That's it, I'm done. It's the opposite. It's an inspiration and an invitation to keep going, to go deeper, to become more intimate with this experience, to invite it more in my life, and to share it with others, right? Collective awakening. That's the deepest shit right there. So, yeah, this doesn't make any sense to me. I hope it was inspiring in some way to bring all of y'all to the cushion or whatever your practice is. Not all of us are heavy sitters, but whatever it is that makes you look at your life. What am I? What is this? And what is this enlightenment deal? So I hope to sit hard with you, and I hope you want to sit hard with me. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions or comments.